All right, so today we're going deep, really deep, into Richard Dawkins's The God Delusion.
The 10th anniversary edition, right?
Yeah, the 10th anniversary edition. And we're not just skimming the surface here. You, the listener, you chose some seriously interesting excerpts focusing on, well, a lot.
Like how Dawkins goes about arguing against, well, God's existence.
Exactly. And his thoughts on religion
Well,
and morality and how all those beliefs kind of ripple out and actually affect, society as a whole.
big stuff, for sure. It's a book that really gets people thinking, even those who, might disagree with him.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. And the excerpts you picked out, they're like Dawkins' greatest hits, We've got sections from chapters like Why There Almost Certainly Is No God.
The Roots of Religion.
Yeah, and The Good Book and The Changing Moral Zeitgeist. Like, come on, those are some serious titles.
And heavy hitters, for sure.
And you didn't stop there. You also flagged some of his, key arguments, right? Like that ultimate Boeing 747 analogy. Brilliant, by the way.
Yeah.
And, of course, his whole critique of Thomas Aquinas's proofs for God's existence.
Classic Dawkins.
Classic. But we're not just sticking to the philosophical high ground. We're also digging into stuff like how morality evolved.
The influence of the Bible.
And, the rise of atheism in the modern world. It's a lot to unpack, but hey, that's what we're here for, right?
Absolutely. And we're doing it all without, taking sides. We're not here to tell you what to believe.
Nope. We're just your intellectual tour guides, here to help you navigate all the twists and turns of Dawkins' thought. And then, you can form your own conclusion.
Exactly.
And speaking of intellectual heavyweights, well, we've got one right here with us today, ready to dive deep into all things Dawkins.
Happy to be here.
Awesome. So, where do we even begin? I guess one of the excerpts you chose was Dawkins' famous ultimate Boeing 747 analogy. It's a pretty classic example of how he uses, wit and humor.
And a bit of, shall we say, provocation.
Right. To make these really complex philosophical ideas actually understandable, relatable even.
It's a great way to get people engaged.
Oh, for sure. So, for those who haven't read The God Delusion, maybe you could break down this analogy for us.
Okay, so Dawkins basically asks, if you wouldn't believe that a fully formed Boeing 747 just, poof, popped into existence out of thin air.
Which, come on, who would?
Exactly. Then why would you believe that the universe, which is, infinitely more complex, just kind of happened?
It's such a simple idea, but it really makes you think.
Right. And what's really interesting is how he uses this analogy to, directly challenge the idea of a, simple God.
Simple.
Right.
Not complicated.
Yeah, exactly. This idea that God is just this uncomplicated being who created everything. Dawkins argues that to create something as intricate, as, magnificent as the universe, you'd need a creator who's at least as complex, if not more so.
So he's basically saying, hold on, a simple God creating a complex universe, something doesn't add up there.
Exactly. He's pushing back against theologians who argue that God is, the simplest explanation for everything. But Dawkins looks at the universe and sees, anything but simplicity.
Right. It was like this incredible tapestry of, interwoven complexities from the subatomic world all the way up to these vast galaxies.
And that's where the 747 analogy comes in. It's like a way to make this really abstract idea more concrete, something we can actually grasp.
Right. We can all picture a 747 just materializing out of nowhere, and we're like, yeah, no, not buying it.
And by using this everyday image, Dawkins helps us see the sheer implausibility of a simple God creating a complex universe. He's basically saying, open your eyes, look around. What you see suggests that a creator, if there is one, must be mind-bogglingly complex.
Okay, so that's Dawkins challenging the idea of a simple God. But he also talks a lot about this trend, right, of Christianity declining, at least in terms of how many people identify as Christian.
Right, and the rise of people who just say, nope, no religion for me.
And he seems to see this as a good thing, right?
He does. He sees it as a sign that people are becoming more, intellectually independent. They're moving away from just accepting things on faith and, embracing critical thinking instead.
But he doesn't just look at the numbers, right?
Mm-hmm.
He actually digs into, what those numbers might mean. Is it really a shift in belief, or is there something else going on?
He's definitely interested in those nuances. He brings up this UK poll where, a surprising number of people who called themselves Christian admitted that they didn't actually believe in God.
Yeah.
And he calls it this lazy temptation to just tick that box on a survey without really believing it.
Maybe because of social pressure or, just what they've always done.
Right. It's like holding on to a cultural identity without, like, truly embracing the beliefs behind it.
And Dawkins thinks that some of those same pressures might be happening in the U.S. too.
Oh, yeah. He points out how, social expectations, like being asked, what church do you go to, can make people, overstate how religious they really are.
It's like they don't want to rock the boat.
Exactly. And then he also highlights, the difficulties people face when they actually choose to leave religion, especially if they're in, like, a prominent position.
It's like that congressman, right? The first openly atheist one.
Yeah, Pete Stark. And there's that clergy project, too, that helps, clergy members who've lost their faith. It shows that even as society becomes more secular, coming out as an atheist can still be really tough.
So it's not just a simple, like, decline of religion.
Yeah.
It's a lot more complicated than that.
Way more nuanced.
So let's shift gears a bit and talk about another big theme you pulled out. The whole idea of faith itself.
Okay, yeah.
Dawkins is pretty clear, right, about the difference between faith, believing something without evidence, and what he calls evidence-based reasoning, which is like, the foundation of science.
That's a core distinction for him.
And he's really critical of creationists, those who, like, reject all the evidence for evolution because they take the Bible literally.
He sees it as, like, the ultimate example of faith trumping evidence.
Right. He talks about this creationist, Kurt Wise, who basically said, even if all the evidence pointed to evolution, I'd still believe in creationism.
Wow. It's like saying, my mind's made up, don't confuse me with the facts.
Exactly. And Dawkins contrasts that, like, unwavering faith with the scientific approach, where you follow the evidence wherever it leads. He even brings up that quote from J.B.S. Haldane, "Find me fossil rabbits in the Precambrian."
Oh, I love that one.
It's so funny, but also, like, so pointed.
Right. It shows how ridiculous it is to cling to beliefs that are just blatantly contradicted by, the fossil record.
And it's one of those aha moments where you're like, okay, Dawkins has a point. Like, if your beliefs can withstand any evidence, no matter how contradictory, then are you really thinking critically?
That's the heart of his argument. He's not saying faith is, like, inherently bad, but he is saying that when it's placed above reason and evidence, it can lead to a really distorted view of reality.
Okay, so we've got Dawkins challenging the idea of a simple God, exploring the complexities of, like, religious identification, and critiquing the whole nature of faith. What else is on the agenda today?
Well, we've got a lot more ground to cover, but maybe we can start with Dawkins's concept of atheist pride. It's a pretty interesting idea.
It is. He basically says that being an atheist is not something to be ashamed of. It's actually something to be proud of.
Right. He really pushes back against that stigma attached to the word atheist.
Like it's a bad word or something.
Exactly. He argues that, atheism, instead of being some kind of moral failing, actually shows intellectual honesty and a commitment to, critical thinking.
It's about having the courage to question what you're told and to base your beliefs on evidence.
Exactly. And he uses this great anecdote about the comedian Julia Sweeney. Remember that one?
Oh, yeah, where she tells her parents she's an atheist, and they're, like, totally horrified.
It perfectly captures that, like, knee-jerk negative reaction that so many atheists face. And Dawkins wants to change that. He wants people to see atheism as, normal, valid, intellectually respectable.
And he also challenges this idea that religion deserves some kind of, like, special treatment, this undeserved respect, as he calls it.
Right, like it's somehow above criticism.
Exactly. And he uses this analogy from Douglas Adams, who pointed out how it's, like, taboo to criticize religious beliefs, even if those beliefs are harmful or just plain wrong.
Like religion gets a free pass when it comes to scrutiny.
And Dawkins says, nope, that's got to change. All beliefs, including religious ones, should be open to, examination and debate.
Absolutely.
And he even applies this to, like, Albert Einstein, one of the most revered figures in history.
Oh, yeah. A lot of religious folks try to claim Einstein as one of their own, but Dawkins sets the record straight.
Right. He points out that while Einstein had this, like, deep sense of awe about the universe, he was very clear that he rejected the idea of a personal God.
A God who, intervenes in our lives and answers prayers and all that.
Right. He even quotes Einstein directly, who said, "The idea of a personal God is quite alien to me and seems even naive."
Powerful stuff. Dawkins uses Einstein's example to show that you can be, completely blown away by the universe without believing in some supernatural creator.
It's about that sense of wonder, that thirst for knowledge, and it's not limited to religious people.
Not at all.
Okay, so we've covered a lot of ground already, but your excerpts have so much more to offer. What's next on our Dawkins adventure?
Well, let's dive into one of the more, I guess, controversial aspects of Dawkins' thought, his critique of NOMA, that's non-overlapping magisteria.
NOMA, the idea that science and religion occupy these separate spheres of knowledge and shouldn't interfere with each other.
Right.
But Dawkins doesn't buy it, does he? He thinks there's bound to be a clash between the two.
He totally rejects NOMA. He argues that the question of whether or not a creator God exists is, well, it's a scientific question, one that we can explore through evidence and reason.
So attempts to, reconcile science and religion, he sees that as kind of a dead end.
He does. He even sees it as potentially harmful.
And he's particularly critical of the Templeton Foundation, which funds all this research trying to find, scientific evidence for religious beliefs.
He sees it as, intellectual dishonesty.
Trying to dress up religion in the language of science without actually, following scientific principles.
Exactly.
And he's not too happy with scientists who try to, appease religious sensitivities, especially in the context of, the American culture wars.
Yeah, it frustrates him to see scientists kind of, giving ground to religion, even when religious claims contradict scientific evidence.
He thinks scientists have a responsibility to defend the integrity of science, even if it ruffles some feathers.
Even if it means challenging those deeply held beliefs.
So we've got critiques of a simple God, critiques of faith, critiques of NOMA. What other intellectual adventures await us with Dawkins?
Well, maybe we should explore one of the most fascinating parts of his thinking. His take on the evolutionary origins of religion. He asks this question that's puzzled a lot of people. Why would something as seemingly wasteful, as extravagant as religion, evolve in the first place?
It does seem counterintuitive. From a Darwinian perspective, anything that doesn't help you survive or reproduce should eventually just disappear. But religion, it's everywhere. So how does Dawkins explain this?
Well, he suggests that religion might not be a direct adaptation itself, but rather a byproduct of other psychological traits that are actually useful for survival.
So a side effect. Something evolved for one reason, but then it leads to these unintended consequences.
Exactly. Think about a child's instinct to obey their parents. It's crucial for survival, right?
Oh yeah, especially when they're little.
But that same instinct can lead them to just accept anything an authority figure says, including religious doctrines, without questioning.
So it's the wiring's there, but it can be hijacked for other purposes.
Exactly. And Dawkins also points to our tendency to, see patterns and intentions where none actually exists. For our ancestors, that was helpful for avoiding predators.
Right. Rustling leaves could mean tigers nearby.
Right. But apply that same thinking to the universe, and suddenly you've got gods controlling the weather and the stars.
Our brains are storytellers, so religion gives us this compelling narrative, even if it's not scientifically accurate.
Exactly. And this is where Dawkins brings in this idea of memes.
Memes, like those funny pictures on the internet.
Well, not exactly. He's using the term in a more scientific sense. He's talking about these units of culture, ideas, beliefs, behaviors, those kinds of things that spread like genes. And religion, he argues, is a very successful memeplex, this cluster of memes that all work together to reinforce each other.
So even if those religious ideas aren't factually true, they can still thrive because they're good at making copies of themselves.
Precisely. You've got rituals, emotional appeals, promises of heaven and hell, social pressure. All of that helps religious memes spread and survive across generations, regardless of whether they're, based in reality.
It's a whole different way of thinking about how religion became so deeply embedded in human societies. But in some of the excerpts you chose, Dawkins gets pretty tough on the Bible as a source of morality.
Yeah, he doesn't pull any punches there. He argues that the Bible, far from being some kind of moral guidebook, is actually full of examples of cruelty, violence, and injustice.
And he's got a lot of examples to back that up.
Oh, yeah. He talks about stoning people for breaking the Sabbath, massacring entire groups of people, and all these horrific punishments for, really minor offenses.
It makes you wonder how anyone can still look at the Bible and see it as a, moral compass.
Right. And Dawkins' point is that we've, evolved morally beyond the values reflected in those ancient texts.
So, the Bible is stuck in the past.
In a way, yeah. He talks about this thing he calls the moral zeitgeist, this, evolving set of moral values that a society holds. And we can see how our views on, slavery, women's rights, LGBTQ plus rights, how those have all changed over time.
And those changes weren't driven by religion.
Not really. Dawkins sees religion as often lagging behind, trying to, catch up to the moral zeitgeist rather than leading it.
So morality is more about social progress, our evolving understanding of the world.
Exactly. And this leads us to another key point that Dawkins makes: the dangers of blind faith.
Especially when it comes to, religious extremism.
Right. He provides some really, disturbing examples of how faith, when taken to extremes, can lead to violence and oppression.
Like people doing terrible things in the name of God.
Exactly. He talks about the persecution of people who leave their faith, the justifications used by suicide bombers, and he even draws this parallel between, the American Christian right and the Taliban.
Wow, that's a pretty bold comparison.
It is. But his point is that both groups exhibit this dangerous form of, religious absolutism, where their beliefs justify pretty much anything.
He's not afraid to make those uncomfortable connections, is he?
Not at all. He thinks it's important to expose how blind faith can be exploited, to justify actions that are, harmful and destructive.
He's not saying all religious people are extremists, but he is highlighting the dangers of putting faith above reason and evidence.
Exactly.
It makes you think about the real-world consequences of these beliefs, which is something we always try to do in these deep dives. Now, Dawkins takes this even further when he starts talking about protecting children from religious indoctrination.
Yeah, this is where things get really controversial.
He compares religious belief to, a mind virus.
Right. He argues that it can infect young minds before they even have the ability to think critically.
And he's really bothered by, the labeling of children with their parents' religion. I remember that example he gives about the multi-faith nativity play where kids from different religious backgrounds are all kind of lumped together.
He sees that as a form of coercion, forcing kids into a religious identity before they can even understand what it means.
He thinks children should be allowed to, develop their own beliefs based on reason and evidence.
Exactly. He doesn't think they should be indoctrinated into a particular faith.
It's a challenging argument, for sure.
It is. It brings up a lot of questions about, parental rights, religious freedom, and the role of critical thinking in education.
So much to think about. Okay, we've spent a lot of time on Dawkins' critique of religion. But he doesn't just tear things down right. He offers a different vision, a way to find meaning and inspiration in a world without God.
Exactly. Dawkins argues that atheism doesn't have to lead to despair or this feeling that life is meaningless. In fact, he sees it as a source of profound wonder and awe.
He gets really eloquent when he talks about the beauty and complexity of the natural world, right?
He does. He finds that same sense of awe and wonder in the scientific understanding of the universe, from the vastness of space to the intricacies of, the human brain. He believes that science offers a story that's more profound, more meaningful than any religious myth.
And he can be pretty playful, too.
Oh, for sure.
He quotes Douglas Adams, the author of The Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy, to kind of make his point.
Oh, yeah, that's a good one.
It's like he's using Adams' humor to help us wrap our heads around how strange and magnificent the universe really is. It's this reminder that embracing a godless reality doesn't have to be bleak or depressing. It can be a source of joy and wonder.
It can be incredibly liberating.
And that challenges that stereotype of atheist as, grumpy and joyless.
Right. Dawkins is arguing that atheism can be a source of deep joy and a sense of liberation. It allows us to see the world as it really is, without the need for supernatural explanations or these comforting illusions.
It's a powerful message. It's about finding meaning and purpose in our connection to the natural world, to humanity, to the pursuit of knowledge itself. But before we wrap up our deep dive into the God Delusion, I wanted to touch on one more concept you highlighted, Dawkins' idea of middle world.
Ah, yes. Middle world. It's a really fascinating idea.
So what is it exactly?
Well, Dawkins uses it to describe how our human perception is, limited. We evolved to survive in a world of medium-sized objects moving at relatively slow speeds.
So our everyday experience.
Exactly. But our brains, they weren't designed to grasp the vastness of the cosmos or the weirdness of quantum mechanics.
So it's like our senses and intuition are only giving us this tiny glimpse of the full picture of reality.
Exactly. And Dawkins argues that this middle world mindset can make it hard for us to really appreciate the truly mind-blowing discoveries of science. Like, we're stuck thinking in terms of, solid objects and cause and effect when the universe is so much stranger and more wondrous than that.
It's a humbling thought. We think we have it all figured out, but we're really just, like, scratching the surface.
Precisely. And Dawkins suggests that by embracing the strangeness of the universe, as revealed by science, we can experience a sense of awe and wonder that goes beyond anything offered by, traditional religion.
So it's about opening our minds to possibilities beyond our everyday experience.
Exactly, to the vastness and complexity of the cosmos.
And recognizing that our own perception is limited.
Absolutely. Like, think about the sheer scale of the universe. Billions upon billions of galaxies, distances that are just unimaginable. Or, consider the bizarre world of quantum mechanics where particles can be in two places at once. It's stuff that challenges our intuition, but it also fills us with this sense of awe and humility.
It's about being open to the mysteries that science is constantly uncovering.
Absolutely. Now, I know Dawkins can be a polarizing figure. Some people find his critique of religion to be, too harsh, too aggressive. What are your thoughts on that?
It's true, he doesn't mince words. But I think it's important to remember that his passion, it comes from a place of deep concern about the harm that he believes religion can cause. He sees dogma and blind faith as these, obstacles to progress, to understanding, to human flourishing.
And he's not afraid to challenge those in power, whether they're religious leaders or politicians who use faith for their own agendas.
So for you listening to this deep dive, what's the takeaway? I think Dawkins would urge you to never stop questioning.
To demand evidence for what you're asked to believe.
And to be wary of anyone who claims to have all the answers.
He's not telling you what to believe, but he is encouraging you to think for yourself, to be skeptical, to embrace the wonder of a universe that's far stranger and more beautiful than any, human-made story.